What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Blazers Uprise Live here on a Monday night. If you're a Seahawks fan, I know we got a lot of Seahawks fans in here. You guys are riding high after the Seahawks shockingly beat the Denver Broncos in Russell Wilson's return game. So hopefully chat's in a pretty good mood tonight if you're a Seahawks fan. If you're a Niner fan like me and Eric, you're down bad after yesterday's debacle. But both me and you won in fantasy. I beat Armand, Connor, Eric set our high score for the week. Football season's underway. We can talk a little bit about that to start this stream, because this is going to be a chill stream. The main point of this stream is we're going to go over CBA ideas and new topics and that sort of thing for the NBA, of course. You know, it's an NBA channel. But yeah, we're just going to kick back, relax, discuss some CBA ideas and changes that maybe we'd like to see. And that's what the stream is going to be today. Eric, what's going on?
Not much. Just enjoying I'm in 4 fantasy leagues. I won all 4, which is kind of hard to do, considering, different teams have different players and you're going up against different players. And in 3 of them, I had the high score for the week. So I'm riding kind of high with fantasy right now.
Nice, yeah. See, I beat Connor. Connor had bad luck. He had multiple guys get knocked out with injury. One of them was Dak Prescott, so it was Connor's first fantasy football matchup. Shout out to our mod, Connor. His defensive kicker outscored me 31-5, and I still got the win. Very low-scoring game there, so didn't go quite how I wanted it to, but I got the dub myself in our fantasy football league. If we did a stream, that's why I'm keeping you guys updated in case anybody cares. We did a stream a little bit ago for our fantasy draft. It's always a fun league to kind of go over. Anyway.
And then my Beavers came back with the last-second touchdown to win on Saturday night. Otherwise, I would have had a very bad football weekend in terms of actual football.
And for me, the Mariners have a 99.8% chance at the playoffs and just had one of the craziest almost choke jobs and then comebacks in baseball. They're up like 6-1 going into the 6-2 going into the final inning, gave up 5 runs. They were down 7-6, bottom of the ninth. They then hit 2 home runs to walk it off. So sports is going good right now. It looks like the Mariners are going to make the playoffs. I'm going to knock on wood because we'll see if they're still cursed. But sports are going good. Hopefully, it can segue into some good basketball. Starting in about basketball starts in less than a month, Eric.
2 weeks from today is training camp.
Yeah, but the first game is the 3rd, which is 3 weeks from today. So we will have a post-game show for that. That'll be up in Seattle. Those post-game shows will be here on the second channel. All right, we're not going to do a bunch of stats graphics or anything. I like to wait until the regular season before rolling out some new stuff. But yeah, as far as content goes, dropped the Believe in Blazers podcast for this weekend last night. So if you haven't watched it, feel free to go watch it after the stream or whenever you want to. And then drop the new Top 100 Players series. That'll be wrapped up by tomorrow. And Eric will have a CBA video that will also be dropped tomorrow. So and then we're getting into player previews starting on Wednesday. So that is the content for you guys. Hopefully everybody's having a good night. Anyway, so me and Eric, we're just gonna bounce back and forth CBA ideas. Don't really know exactly how this is gonna go, but it should be fun, and obviously we'll interact with chat on some of these ideas. So Eric, do you want me to start? Do you want to start?
Go ahead. You have some pretty big ones. So.
All right. So I've said this in the past, but I have some more details, and I want to know what you guys think, chat. And this is fun to think about. But first off, I think they need to change the dates on the offseason. I think that free agency should come before the draft. Eric, are you in favor of that?
No, I kind of like having the draft beforehand.
Okay. I have never been a fan of that. The NFL always does the draft after free agency, so you kind of know what team needs are. And part of the reason for this is an idea that I'll bring up later on in the stream. But yeah, I would do the draft in late July, and then Summer League early August is one of the changes that I would make to it. There is a reason that goes into that I won't touch on yet. But speaking of the draft, chat, I want to know what you guys think about that. Do you think the draft should be in late July after free agency, or do you like having it in early June? I feel like it's too close to the end of the season, Eric.
Yeah, well, I mean, the timing of it could be different, but I think if you had already signed free agents, I think that would limit some of the trades you make. And right now it's on the previous league year still. You haven't switched over to the new salaries and stuff. So I believe it would kind of mess up trades and stuff like that.
How would it? I'm confused.
Well, like, because like right now you're in the previous league year still, and you haven't signed free agents. You don't have cap space and things like that, where like the draft sometimes sets up some of those moves. Like a team is trying to dump a draft pick to, like Philadelphia was trying to attach Danny Green to save some cap space to their first round pick this last year. Things like that. If it's after free agency, they could still technically trade the draft pick, I guess, ahead of time, but the actual draft day trades, I think, becomes less of a strategy than maneuvering the draft board and maneuvering your salary cap to set up free agency via draft picks and stuff like that, I think would become less frequent.
Yeah, I just think you have it earlier. But yeah, it'd be interesting just to see how the trade dynamics work out around that. But I've always just been in favor of it because you don't know what your team needs are necessarily as you head into the draft, because free agency determines things. So in the NFL, teams use the draft to plug some holes that they're not able to fill in free agency. It would be interesting to see if the NBA draft would work the same way if it was after free agency.
What's the difference between filling your needs through the draft and then knowing what needs you have to have in free agency versus the other way around?
I mean, it's just different. I don't really know. There's not a preference with that, but I do have an idea that I will get into later that this would have to be the case. That's a teaser. Anyway, let's talk about 4-round draft. All right.
An idea Mark Cuban had recently.
A 4-round draft, yes. And basically the reason for a 4-round draft, the only way it would work is if you had every team in the league that had a G League team and had control of all the players on their G League team, right? So like a true minor league system, just like the MLB. The MLB had a freaking 40-round draft. I don't know if it's still 40 rounds, but these MLB teams will have like 3-4 different levels of minor league teams, and they control the prospects in those minor leagues, and like at some point they can get called up to the major leagues and play for that major league baseball team, right? Whereas right now in the G League, NBA teams assign players to the G League, right? You have two-way players that'll play some time in the G League. You can assign, you can assign players down if they're injured and rehabbing. Nurk practiced with a G League team when he was coming back from his broken leg a couple years ago. But they're NBA players playing down in the G League, or they're two-way players. All the guys on G League contracts that aren't on a two-way or an NBA contract, they're not part of any NBA organization. They're just a part of the G League organization. So that's the difference. I would love it, Eric, if there was like a true minor league system, at least at the G League level, where every NBA team had a G League team, and then basically all the players on that G League team were a part of the NBA organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. The Denver Nuggets, I think this year, are starting with a G League team, and Phoenix got rid of theirs, and we haven't had one since the Idaho Stampede a long time ago. So us and Phoenix, those are the only two teams that do not have an official G League team. I don't know why the NBA allows two teams to not have one, but completely agree. I think there's, much like we talked about with the expansion last stream, there's plenty of talent to fill a whole G League roster with, some unknown players or some players that could be turned into something if given a shot to play in a league like that. And you'd have your coaching staff there, so you would know from your parent organization that what you wanted to focus on. Like you said, you could send players back and forth really easily. I think the two-way contract model would be perfect for basically everyone on the roster. You could just have a certain amount of games that they're eligible to come up to.
I actually have numbers that I've come up with for that we can get into. Let's go. the 4-round NBA draft makes sense because it's like the first 2 rounds they already have, that's for the NBA team, right? And then the next 2 rounds you'd probably be drafting for your G League team. Guys that could potentially make the NBA roster or whatever, but would be for the G League team. So the way I've thought up the G League contracts is having 2 tiers, okay? Just tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1 gets paid... This is just a rough estimate. I don't know what the money is for G League guys, but tier 1 contracts, you get 60 to 80% of the rookie minimum, and you can spend, I just came up with 40% of the NBA season up in the NBA. It could be lower, right? These are just kind of rough estimates for numbers.
I think the 2-way guys get 500,000 right now.
500,000? Okay.
Roughly that, yeah.
Yeah, so could be a little bit lower in terms of percentages, but basically tier 1 contracts, you get paid a little bit more. You have 5 of those that you can hand out, and then tier 2 contracts, you get paid a little less, maybe 40 to 60% instead of 60 to 80, and then you have 8 of those, making up a 13-player G League roster, and they can play in the NBA for only 20% of the NBA season. So basically, tier 1 guys are closer to what 2-way is right now. They get paid a little bit more, and they're able to play in the NBA a little bit more during the course of the regular season compared to 2-way guys. You can still call up whoever if they still have NBA days left. That's just like the 2-way system, but that is just kind of how I think it should work, where maybe you have designated like top prospects on your G League team that you can call up a little bit more often and get paid a little bit more.
Yeah, I like it.
So another thing you could do with that is players drafted in the 2nd or 3rd rounds. If you sign them to a G League contract, they have to be a tier 1 contract, and then anybody drafted in the 4th round can be signed to a tier 2 contract. That could make some sense. But it would just be interesting to see how it is tiered.
Marcus Lake says, would you be annoyed if G League contract mismanagement stunted your favorite team's success?
See, that's the thing, is you'd have some teams under this model, like the Heat, that would make great use of this model, whereas some other teams like wouldn't at all. You know what I mean? But it'd just be interesting to see how teams really utilized a full minor league system. Right? For player development especially. So, I don't know. Obviously, if they're making bad decisions, regardless if it's at the NBA or the G League level, obviously I'm not going to care as much if it's at the G League level, but that is obviously something we'd pay attention to. Me and Eric were sitting there after the draft talking about undrafted players that we wish we would sign. Instead, it could be we could be talking about our 3rd round draft pick and who we should target there, because me and Eric are some draft nerds.
We would have had like the 6th pick in the 3rd round. We could have taken like Dominic Barlow or something, you know? And then you would have been happy after you were sad a few seconds earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So instead of having undrafted free agents sign 2-way contracts, those guys would be 3rd round draft picks probably, and then get kind of the equivalent of a 2-way contract as a G League contract is basically how that'd work. And then obviously you control your lower tier G League players. Anything else you want to touch upon with that idea?
Well,
that would just be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so Marcus says there would need to be some kind of cap firewall and process to convert G League contract to NBA contracts. Yeah, it'd be very similar to the 2-way contract conversion. It's like if you want to have them on your playoff roster or whatever, you need to sign them to the actual team by the end of the season, and you have to have a roster spot open for that. I guess there could be like in baseball, once it hits September 1st, the roster size is increased. Like, so maybe you are able to increase your roster to 18 for the last month of the season, like March 1st or whatever. And then you have like 18 players on your roster, so you can call up your top 3 G League players once that season is over. And Taylor Packer asks, is there enough talent for that? And then this goes back to the whole mismanagement stuff. So teams like the Kings, who have mismanaged the cap and have sucked for 15, 16 years, they have a G League team right now. It's not like that's not the reason why they're not doing well. So you need smart organizations, and this to me makes scouting a lot more important. It makes your assistant GMs and your GM all have to be very good at what they do. And the ones who are good, like you mentioned, the Miami Heat, who always seem to find under the radar players that no one's ever heard of, and they turn into capable rotation players. Like those kind of teams and organizations will thrive under that system, and it'll just be an even more bonus for them. And I like those type of organizations getting rewarded. And if your team makes horrible decisions and mismanages the cap because of their G League team, then that guy probably shouldn't be the GM of your team anyway.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, cap-wise, the G League cap and salary would be separate. And that's the thing with tiered contracts, is if you just had, like, 2 tiers of contracts, they'd all make, like, a certain range of money where it wouldn't really even be needed. Yeah, like a salary cap wouldn't even be needed if you just had tiered contracts. That it was like you could only make 60 to 80% of the rookie minimum, which is more than the 2-way contracts are right now. So maybe it'd even be a little bit less. So it would just be 2 separate entities, and the G League contracts wouldn't apply to anything NBA wise in terms of the payroll. Just like the 2-way contracts don't apply to anything NBA wise in terms of the payroll. And then you could include G League players in trades, and they just wouldn't count as outgoing or incoming salary whatsoever. It would basically be as if you're sending a 2nd round pick to a team. Instead, you're just sending a prospect with no monetary value.
Yeah. Also, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
It's all good.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I completely lost it.
Dang. Talking about cap G League.
Yeah, I don't remember what I was gonna say.
Dang it! If you remember later.
Okay, I remember now.
Perfect.
So people are talking about how maybe that's not sustainable revenue-wise, but I'd argue that if it was tied to an NBA team like this, how many people more would be paying attention to the G League versus right now, who they don't necessarily have to pay attention. There's not really a need to pay attention to it other than, to see some secondary basketball. And, there's some good games and some good players in that league, but I mean, it's not, you don't have any ties to it. But like, just think right now, if we had like Jabari Walker or something was going to be our star of our G League team, I'm not saying he would not make the regular team, but in theory, we took him with the 57th pick or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so, like, that would be cool to be like, okay, Jabari's going to go down and get all these minutes, or Greg Brown isn't going to play at all on our main team. Let's send him down and get minutes at the G League level and have coaching that's designed to hopefully make him, better once he comes back up to the regular team. And I think a lot of people would pay attention to that more, and it would generate more revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's used as a developmental tool. Like, Keon Johnson is not getting playing time right now. Let's send him down to the G League for a few games so we can get some playing time, because he's not getting it right now. Obviously, you want to have insurance policy in place during the course of a game in case you have to sub a guy in. But, yeah, if it was a situation like that, and then say we drafted a Dominic Barlow, which was a guy I was advocating for at the end of the draft, instead of sticking him on a 2-way contract and him playing at the end of the bench, and then maybe setting him to a random G League team since we don't have one, and then him playing with some random guys that don't matter in a system that doesn't even really care about his development a whole lot, like, that's not as good as if we could have drafted him. Imagine if we drafted him and put him in a G League that runs the same system that we do in the NBA or something close, and then if every team had its own G League team that was all the organization's players, they would really be invested with how those players are being developed and how those players are being looked after at the G League level. So that's the thing, is you'd have a coaching staff at the G League level looking to put a guy like a Dominic Barlow in a position to develop into some challenging, some situations on the court during the course of a game to challenge him. And I would watch that. So you'd have more interest in the G League for sure, I think, if every team had control over every player on their G League team, and it was like an extension of the organization compared to something that feels kind of completely different.
Mm-hmm. Chris asked... go ahead. No, go ahead.
You could still have your like unaffiliated G League teams like the G League Ignite, which you know players fresh out of high school can play a year 4 and then get drafted. So you could still have a G League Ignite team too.
Yep. And Chris asked a good question. Do you think it would stop guys from declaring for the draft earlier in their college career because they didn't want to risk being taken super late and be stuck on a low value contract as like a 4th round pick versus going back to school? And with NIL deals now and getting paid a lot more in college, I could definitely see a scenario. You already saw it with some players, Baycott and Caleb Love from UNC this year going back to school.
Timmy is another guy.
Drew Timmy, yeah, he would have definitely been drafted in the 3rd or 4th round if the team had a G League team. But yeah, so those kind of guys, yeah, it might help the college game out a lot more, having guys stay longer and knowing that. Because right now, it's kind of set up in a way where you have to be really good if you're 23, 24 in college and you're a senior and you go into the draft. You know, a lot of those guys don't get drafted or fall in the draft because of their age. Whereas if you had 3 or 4 rounds, those guys would be the type of guys who got drafted plentiful in the 3rd and 4th rounds. So.
Yeah, they still get their dream of being drafted to the NBA, to an NBA organization. More guys get that, get that dream fulfilled. And
they might not even have a chance. Those might be all guys who would have to normally go overseas and play if they're going to continue their basketball career. But now they
or at best two-way guys.
Yeah, now they can stay and be part of an organization and continue their career and try to improve their games from there. And then you might see a lot more players like Malcolm Brogdon is one of the main examples of a guy. Herb Jones last year, I think, was 23 or 24. So those kind of guys do get chances sometimes, but you might see a lot more of those guys that just simply didn't get the ability to get drafted because people thought they had tapped out their potential because they were older. And
Fred VanVleet.
Yep. And so
those undrafted, he's an all-star now.
Yep. So those kind of guys, it'd be fun to watch and see how many of those people would step up and prove that they're NBA worthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's when I really wanted this system put in place was when we were playing like Jaron Cumberland and like these guys when COVID hit and we had to sign these random players that had no clue who they were. And it was like, man, if only we just had a G League system like this where we just call up our G League players that we're already familiar with, already been developing as part of our system. Hopefully it's not another scenario where you have, the same thing happen in the future, right? But in that case, it was nice to be able to call up players. And there's teams that'll like, oh, they only have 8 guys dressed today or 7, you know what I mean? Like at the end of the season, especially, and with tanking teams and all this, it's like these teams are still going to tank. And you see, like, the Thunder sign a couple guys for 2 games last year. They signed my guy, I forgot how to say his first name, but Kalizaki's. They signed him for 2 games, and then he's gone. It's like, wouldn't it be nice if the guys that they were developing all season, if they could just reward them by calling them up, and the guys already had some familiarity with playing with each other, and, we're already part of the organization, and the fan base knew them, right? Like, it'd just be a much better system. And they're so close, you wouldn't even have to change much. Just every NBA team has a G League team instead of almost every single one. And then the 2-way contracts are just G League contracts. And then everybody in the G League is part of an NBA organization by extension. Simple. Like, doesn't take much. So that's the number one thing that I want to see in the next CBA.
Want to say what's up to Rick. Says, love the channel, sending love from Long Island. Let's go Blazers. Absolutely. Looking forward to cheering that for real in a few weeks. And then Marcus has another good question or statement. For players who can sign with any team right now, do you think that would have a negative effect if they're only allowed to go up with the team they're on? Or do you think that it would actually be more helpful, if that makes sense? Because like right now, if you're not signed to a 2-way contract and you're, say, on the Golden State Warriors G League team, like any team could bring you up and sign you. whereas that kind of limits your opportunity to just being with the one organization.
Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be a situation where you'd have to negotiate it with the team that has your rights. Like if you're an older player playing on a G League contract or whatever, and you have the chance to get signed elsewhere, then you could go to your NBA organization. It has to be bought out. You could maybe come up with a clause in G League contracts that players could get. Maybe veteran G League guys or guys that entered the league or the G League over 4 years ago or whatever, where if an NBA team wants to sign them, they can. You don't want that to be the case with rookies or like prospects or developmental pieces, some more long-term guys, but for some veterans in the G League, it would make sense to give them some sort of clause, or make that something that could be negotiated between the player and the organization, just to work around that.
Maybe there'd be something like if you were, how you had the 2 tiers, like if you were a tier 2 player, you could sign with another team, but then that player gets, like in the NFL, they do the compensatory picks. So maybe you get an extra 3rd round pick if one of your tier 2 guys signs with another team for developing them or something.
Are you trying to segue me to my next idea? We're going to wait on that.
Sure.
We're gonna wait. No, you said you had a couple things that you wanted to toss out there. Let's get to them before I get to compensation picks.
Well, actually, I don't mind talking about that right now. I can wait for mine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first, there's... Because this is kind of free agent based, and I had a couple small ideas for free agency if you wanted to talk about those first.
Mm-hmm. Whatever you think is best.
I feel like if you have a trade exception, this might not make sense. I don't know. It's just an idea. I don't know how I feel about this. But if you have a trade exception, you should be able to use that trade exception to sign a player, but if you do, it imposes a hard cap at the tax apron. What do you think, Eric?
Well, it's basically like, no, it wouldn't be a sign and trade. It would just be an outright signing. I don't mind that.
Yeah, basically. Because that's the thing, is you have to get the other team to agree to the sign and trade, and then they want compensation and whatnot. You have this money that you saved in a trade. Instead of only being able to use it to acquire money in a trade, you could acquire money via free agency, essentially, by signing a player to a contract within that TPE. That could be something interesting, just an idea.
I mean, maybe it could just be like basically the other team is forced to have to do the sign and trade for nothing, if that person wants to sign with you. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah. Could also have something where if a player leaves via free agency, it creates a trade exception worth either their salary or half their salary or something, and then if you, depending on what you spend, I don't know, it'd be hard to sort it out, but I don't know, that's a rabbit hole that's kind of complicated.
Right. The only complication I see with that is there's obviously exceptions to this, but a lot of teams are operating over the salary cap as it is, so if you add those kind of dynamics to it, is it just going to make the richer teams that are willing to pay the tax give them more advantages and hurt the smaller market teams that maybe can't do that or go so far over the cap?
That's the nice thing about a hard cap. Anything you institute, if you're worried about that, you can just say, oh, well, if you utilize this tool, it imposes a hard cap. So that's why the hard cap exists in the first place, is to kind of stop that from happening. But the other thing was, like, there was a rumor years ago that NBA owners wanted this, okay? And I don't think it'll ever be added because I don't think the players will go for it. I think that I just don't see it happening. But that is a franchise tag, Eric. A franchise tag, which is a thing in the NFL where if a player's a free agent, an organization can franchise tag them and keep that player on essentially a 1-year contract worth a designated amount. Okay? And it basically keeps that player from reaching free agency. That's why players, I don't think, would ever go for this, but I tried to come up with some parameters to maybe make it fair, okay? And I want your thoughts on these. You can only franchise tag a player once over the course of the CBA, right? Just like the amnesty clause back in the day, so 7 years, 10 years, or you can say twice during the course of the CBA, or you can say once every other year, I don't know. But make it so that you can't just do it all the time or whenever you want, okay?
So each year you can do a different player, or just one time you can use
only one time during the course of the CBA, or 2 times. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The franchise tag amount is 37.5% of the salary cap, and it imposes a hard cap, so you can't do it if you are past the hard cap, and the amount of money is a little bit more than the max contract. The franchise tag player has a no trade clause, and then obviously you'd have to franchise tag the player like the day before free agency would be the cutoff for that. But basically a situation where the player is, wants to reach free agency. If they get tagged, then that's the point of a 37.5% of the salary cap for their salary. It's a little bit more than the maximum max contract. I think if there's ever a franchise tag, it should be where you make even more than you could possibly make, since you're getting your free agency taken away from you for a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that I doubt the players would ever go for that, but it'd be interesting to see how you utilize that, and it might make a lot of teams less willing to sign a certain player to an extension sooner.
Yeah. Just interesting. It was rumored that owners wanted it, but that's the thing, is you have to make it good enough, and that's what I was trying to do with these parameters. Was try to make it good enough for the players to potentially be okay with that being added. And then obviously it's like, if you're worried about losing LaMarcus Aldridge in free agency, you can franchise tag him for a year, and then during that year you could trade them or whatever. It just creates an interesting dynamic if that player also has a no trade clause.
Yeah.
So they could kind of control where they could potentially be traded.
I think between already being locked up for 4 years on the rookie scale and then having restricted rights after that, so at minimum it's 5 years before you can get out of a deal. I think that's just a little too complicated for most players. I think they want to be able to be free. You see more of a empowerment for them to be more freer, not less freer.
Yeah. Anyway, compensation.
Well, that kind of ties into one of my. So, this is something that, Tori, you've probably heard me say several times. I believe, I don't know why it's not like this, because you have minimum contracts, right? That no matter how many years you're in the league, it counts the same amount. So like Carmelo Anthony, if he signs a minimum contract, it counts as the 2-year player. And that way veterans don't get go unsigned because a team can just sign someone who's played less years for much less money. So the NBA pays the difference between, I think right this year it's like 1.9 million, and then like Carmelo can sign for 2.8 million or something. So the NBA pays the 900,000. So the Supermax was put into place several years ago. I feel like it had good intentions, but I feel like it punishes teams like Portland that get their superstar to stay in Portland, who qualify for the Supermax, and then have to pay him $60 million, whereas the LA Lakers signed LeBron James and they can only pay him, say, $40 million or whatever. But so in my mind, it should be the same for the maximum contracts as the minimum contracts. The players still make whatever money they earn, but that year Dame makes $60 million, it should be a cap on the salary cap of $40 million or whatever the
whatever another team could sign him for.
Yeah, 5-year max salary number, whatever. Yeah. So like, if you're coming off your rookie scale, you've been in the league 4 years and you're signing like Luka Doncic this last offseason. I know he signed an extension before, but he's going into like his first year of his rookie extension this year. That whatever that number that is, any player making above that is making that amount towards the cap. And so even if Damon's making $50 million, it only counts as $33 million or whatever against the cap this season. And I think that would really help teams like Portland and small market teams not only keep their stars, but also build competitive teams around them. And I don't think it's fair that the Blazers have to worry about having a discussion whether it's worth keeping Damian Lillard when he's making $60 million or not. I don't think that's fair to the Portland Trail Blazers. I think they should be rewarded for getting him to stay, not the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. Because, the Supermax is in place to try and help teams keep their players. But, there is a detriment there when it's more money on the books than, a normal max. So that difference should be eliminated. Absolutely agree with that.
That's my main one. That always bugs me. It stems from, there was a time around 2016 where several players, I think it was like Kawhi, Klay Thompson, there were several players that signed max contracts in the years leading up to the 2016 offseason when the cap jumped. Mm-hmm. And then the cap jumped, and players that offseason were making, 27, 28 million their first year of their of their max deals. And you had players like Kawhi and Klay who were also on max deals, but signed 1 year prior and were making like 17 million. And there was like a 10 million difference for a few years between players on max contracts. And I just don't see why one team should be punished because they had a player a year older, a year younger, first or became a free agent in a different year. I think they should all just count against the cap regardless of what year you sign.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that as well. Stipend rule, do you think there might be any changes to that? Or would you make any changes to that? Maybe where you can't swap your pick if it applies to like pick swaps, so you can't swap your pick in like in between years or what?
This might sound crazy and this is super scary, but I kind of wish they would get rid of the Stepian rule.
The Stepian rule. No, that's...
I know it saves teams from themselves and they won't do it probably, but I would love to see a world where you could just do whatever you wanted with your draft picks.
I just think that would absolutely destroy parity because you'd have teams that are stacked. Because that's the thing is, like, a lot of teams get to contention by trading a draft pick or two. But if they could then trade, like, 4 or 5 more to just make themselves absolutely a super team, like Phoenix being able to trade 7 firsts for Kevin Durant this offseason, then you have a situation where I think you have more super teams, and then like after their run's over and they have no picks for multiple years, you have more like terrible bottom feeders who aren't even able to get up off the mat for multiple years. So I think it would make good teams even better. It would make great teams absolute super teams, and I feel like it'd make, the young rebuilding teams worse for longer. So that's why I like the Stepian rule.
I know too. In theory, like you said, it protects teams from doing that, but I just think it would be fun. I think it would kind of devalue picks a little bit if you could just trade multiple ones. But, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to me, like, if you're the Phoenix Suns, would you trade 7 first-round picks for Kevin Durant if you could? Or would you not do that? Like, it's an interesting... It brings about a lot more opportunities, but I understand why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I just think it comes down to you're trying to win a championship, so, if other teams are able to be aggressive in that regard too, then it's like we got to be more aggressive than the other contenders, and we got to go all in, push all the chips all in on winning a championship right now, even if it screws us for a decade. I think that's kind of the thinking that you would see between high-level contending teams.
What about making it so you could only do protections for like 3 years or something?
3 years.
Or like just making it so you couldn't do like what the Blazers did last year and protect it for.
I just don't see any reason to do that. Like, I don't know. Protecting it that long is already kind of dumb in the first place, and you can always lower the protections. I just don't really know why there would be necessarily a term limit there. Yeah, honestly, pick-wise, I think your ability to trade picks right now in the rules around trading draft picks, I think, are pretty much perfect at this point.
So you mentioned how you might want to get rid of the swaps in between picks. How is that different than just being able to trade the picks?
What do you mean?
Like the swaps right now. Because, like, in theory, the Suns could trade 4 firsts and 3 swaps or whatever instead of 7 firsts. It's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, so I'm not saying I'm in favor for this, but maybe it's something where you have to have your own draft pick once out of every 2 years. Like, you can't go back-to-back years without your own draft pick, your own first-round draft pick. Right now, you can't go back-to-back years without a first-round draft pick. So you can swap, you can trade a 2023 first and a 2025 first, unprotected, where you for sure don't have them, to another team, and then you can give that team the right to swap in 2024 since you still have a draft pick. But if it was that you couldn't go back-to-back years without having your own draft pick, then you couldn't do a swap because you couldn't lose that pick.
Taylor
so
says
maybe that's something in the future, but that would make it harder to make those types of trades. It's kind of opposite direction you're going.
Taylor says, would you really want Cronin to be able to trade our pick 30 years from now? I don't want to change you can only trade from 7 years in the future. I don't want to change that. But no, that would be scary for some GMs. We don't really know what Cronin would do or would have done had he had full access to first round picks going back as far as the trade deadline. So I'm kind of thankful that that was in place, so we didn't do something really dumb like we probably would have given up a lot more at the trade deadline for Jeremy Grant than we ended up getting him for, so it all worked out. But I think there's one thing about the draft that I think we can all agree on needs to be changed, and that's this stupid thing where the player wears the hat of the team that drafts him, and then it always goes down as him being drafted by that team. Look at the NFL model, please. Please. Just, if they've already agreed to a trade, let him wear the hat of whatever team he got drafted to. Announce the trade at the time of the pick. Say this pick is being traded as part of a future pick to the Portland Trailblazers, and don't send like whoever in a Detroit Pistons hat to the state. It's just so dumb. I think we all agree that it should just be that way from the beginning. And if you're going to allow trades that can't take place until like July 14th or something like that, just make it official now, but it just isn't official yet. Like we do in the mock-off season, just make it go through.
Yeah.
Like, why do you have to wait? If it was going to work on that date, just let them make it work right away.
Yeah, and just when the trade's put through at the league office, have like a date attached to that trade in terms of just like chronologically, right? Like that's the thing. The order of things gets messy, but yeah, just put it through. I agree with that. I agree with that. There's just, trades that go through can't be made until certain dates, and then it's like those teams start talking with other teams even though the trade isn't official, and they start talking with other teams with the assets that they're going to get in that trade. Instead, it's just put it through. Yeah, put it through right away. I agree.
Caleb says it would get real awkward if the trade was illegal. But here's the thing. It's like the hard cap right now, right? So the Blazers can't, or like once they signed Gary Payton, even though it was the moratorium and they hadn't officially signed him yet, they couldn't then trade Eric Bledsoe's contract for someone making $19 million because that would invalidate the Gary Payton signing. So that's what you do. You just, if they go to make another move and that invalidates the trade they were going to make or had already made that wasn't official yet, then the NBA says, nope, that's invalid move because you've already made this move. So I think it would be pretty easy to police it.
Yeah, I mean, we police it in our mock off season, so the NBA could absolutely police it if we can do it. Two bozos with some spreadsheets. All right. Anyway, you want to talk compensation now?
Sure. Let's actually.
Or do you have something else?
Let's. Do you think there should be a CBA rule addressing mental health when someone is not injured? Asked Max Anderson.
I don't know how you come up with anything that works for that, like, because, I mean, the Ben Simmons thing is just the whole Ben Simmons thing is just a mess, man. I'm not sure you can really put anything in place that makes sense to stop that from happening again, but it absolutely seemed like he was using mental health as an excuse to still try and get paid during his holdout because he wanted to trade. And hopefully that's not the case, man. Like, because I would hate to see somebody try and weaponize mental health in that sort of way. Like, that would be a disgusting thing to do. So I hope that's not the case. But that's the thing, is like, how do you know if he's actually dealing with, mental health problems, or how do you know if he's weaponizing it? Like, it's just such a messy and bad situation to even start speculating that I don't know how there would ever be any sort of rule put into that.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to police that. It's like, how do you determine if a player is faking it for money or really does have issues and can't show up? And there was a player is a ways back, but I think his name was Royce White, who had a fear of flying and just like kind of went crazy trying to be in the NBA and like just couldn't handle it and stuff like that. Like, I think there should be programs set up, and this is something that just looking into stuff that's going to be a factor in the next collective bargaining agreement, and that's just having better health care, and that includes mental health checkups and things like that. And also, once you're retired or done in the NBA, having lifelong insurance plans and things like that. I think all those could see improvement. And with everything in this country, I think there needs to be more of a focus on mental health, especially for younger adults. And hopefully that isn't really an issue for players. They want to be there and want to play. But I don't see a problem. I don't really see it being a problem if a player is under contract and doesn't feel like they're capable of playing. Now, if the Ben Simmons situation really was him just trying to get paid while he's requesting a trade, I mean, that might be kind of different. If you're requesting a trade and you're not showing up, and then you just show up and say you have a mental health thing, maybe you look at that case differently. But I think in most cases, if a player isn't going to be with the team and fighting with his teammates and things like that, and being there and trying to win games, that there needs to be some sort of policy in place, because that person is probably struggling with something really bad in their life, and you would hopefully be able to get them the help they need to get their life back on track.
Yeah. I think in regards to like trade demands, I think the only thing you could do that might make some sense is if a player demands a trade, it institutes a negative trade kicker. Where if they get traded after demanding a trade, like that has to be a part of it, where if they demand a trade, then if they get their wish and get traded, there's a negative trade kicker where their contract salary gets reduced by 20% or something.
But still 15%. Counts against the salary cap for that team the same.
Yep. Yeah, all the salaries, everything else is still the same, but they willingly give up money as part of their trade demand. Well, now it's like, how do you make a trade demand official, and like, the NBA, it would probably create a situation where the NBA team is proving like, yeah, he came to us and he asked for a trade demand, you know what I mean? But like, that's the thing is, you should have a receipt somewhere, either the player's agent calling you or texting you or whatever. The player coming into the office, like, I don't know. It's just, how would that be policed? Like, did he actually demand a trade or not? Because obviously you don't, like, if a team just trades a player, he shouldn't make less money. But if a player demands a trade, there should be some sort of, I don't know, maybe reduction in contract or something, because I don't know. Like, you have Kevin Durant hold the league hostage all summer, and then he's like, actually, I'll like, take back my trade demand.
But that's a good example of why not to have that policy, because a player that's under contract for 4 more years, you can stand up to that player and say, no, man, you're under contract. And unlike the NFL, where you could just cut a lot of players that don't have guaranteed money at any point, and it's kind of BS to then be able to, like, hold them hostage and not demand a trade to a better situation. The guaranteed contracts, for the most part in the NBA, I think that makes it so, like, a lot of players, they want to get paid. So maybe if you had some sort of thing, but I could see a lot of teams leaking that a certain player demanded a trade, when a lot of that stuff probably goes on behind closed doors that we never hear about right now. Like Donovan Mitchell, for example. Like, it wasn't announced that he demanded a trade, but maybe behind the closed doors, he said, I don't want to be here or whatever. Like, I don't think he should be punished for that if Utah's going through a rebuild or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's as a GM where you just need recordings of your conversations.
Yeah.
You know, like that. You wouldn't have to make public or anything that you keep in your own possession, but then you could go to the NBA and say he proved, or just go to the NBA as proof and show them that a certain player demanded a trade. But it's like, I don't know, like, how do you stop holdouts and whatnot? I don't know if you can. I think that's always going to be a thing. So it's kind of hard to change anything in that regard.
Well, you stop holdouts by them not getting paid, like Ben Simmons last year, and then he found a way around that, I guess. But yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's like, if you don't play, you shouldn't get paid unless you got physically injured. Now, I don't know. That's the thing, is you're going to have players say, well, my mental health isn't right. And maybe it's not, but you could see some more players weaponize that. You know, that's kind of the hold up with that, is are players going to hold out and say that, and then secretly they're telling the team, yeah, I want to trade? Like, what lengths will certain guys go to? That's kind of, I don't know. I don't know if there's a perfect way to stop that.
Yeah. I kind of like just getting rid of players that don't want to be there. I don't want them on my team either if they don't want to be there.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. There's just certain guys the past few years, man. I wish there was a way to do it better. Like, dude, this dude signed a 4-year contract extension, and before he even starts the extension is already demanding a trade. Like, I mean, that's on him for the 4-year contract extension. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It's just messy, you know. It's just messy. It creates good drama, but it's just weird, man. I don't know. And
he thought he could, like, force his way to the Suns or whatever team he wanted to go to, and that, I'm so glad they stood up to him.
Yep, you just need more teams playing hardball, I think, is kind of the way to stop it. But do you have any other suggestions or ideas before I get into compensation?
Go ahead.
All right, so part of the idea that I said at the start of the stream with having the draft, like, maybe a month after free agency or 3 weeks or whatever, is if you lost a free agent in free agency, you could get a compensation pick, which is the case in, I think, both the MLB and the NFL, correct?
Yeah, but it doesn't take place till the following year. So it wouldn't be like from free agency from 2022. It would be the 2023 draft.
2023. Yeah. So you could all the things I'm going to say, you could format it where it takes place in the following year, or if you had free agency before the draft, then it could potentially take place in that year. It's just, what about players that wait to sign? The thing is, most players don't wait to sign. So You know, who knows with the dates and when exactly it takes place. But do you have ideas on this? Do you want to kind of say, or do you just want me to go in on just kind of how I'd structure it?
You can go on it. I'm actually not a fan of the way that MLB and NFL do it, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, so basically you'd have different tiers of compensation pick dependent on how good the player is that left your team, right? So if you lost an NBA superstar, a top 10 player, you would get a higher compensation pick. Now, there's two different ways that you could determine what tier of compensation pick you get back for a free agent that leaves your team in free agency. You could either have it be based on how much that player signed for, but then the problem is you know, is a player signing for just less because of the tier, or is a team, you know, I don't know. The other way that you could determine it is you could have an arbitration panel, like a compensation committee that determines what tier of compensation pick a team should be awarded for the player that left. The problem with that is the league going to play favoritism? But you do have an arbitration panel in MLB for contracts after, I believe, 6 years of MLB experience, right? So that's the two different ways you could determine it. But basically, I came up with 4 different tiers of compensation pick that you get depending on how good the player is that leaves. So the top tier is NBA superstar, which would be a top 10 player. In that case, you'd get a mid-lottery pick, so like 6th, 7th, somewhere in that range. It is extremely hard to replace an NBA superstar, and if you lose an NBA superstar, honestly, like, that's worth multiple lottery picks. So I think a pick in the middle of the lottery makes sense there. If you lose an NBA All-Star, so like, you know, 10th to 25th best player, you get an end of the lottery draft pick. If you lose like a good starting caliber player, maybe the 25th to the 75th best player in the league, you get something starting at 20. And then if you lose a good role player, you get something at the end of the first round, right? And you can structure it like that, and you can, you know, add tiers, you know, eliminate tiers, but that would basically be the structure. And then you basically get an extra draft pick for your free agent that left.
The reason why I don't like that is because, like, let's say you had the 15th pick and there was 3 competent picks, and it becomes the 18th pick or something like that. I don't like being punished for something that might not even have involved any of your teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really look at that as a punishment, because you got the 15th pick instead of the 18th pick because you lost usually a couple more games during the course of the regular season. So, you know what I mean? It's already kind of arbitrary, or in a blurred line anyway.
There's 2 reasons for this, but do you know why there's not many trades in the NFL, like during the season or at the deadline?
I know that the hard cap is, like, there's different rules around that make trading a little harder, but
part of it is to do with like the guaranteed money, and the NFL dead contracts cap are weird. They have dead caps, so like if you trade someone making $30 million, it only counts as like $5 million in some cases against the new team's cap, and you have $25 million in dead cap. Something crazy like that. I think that's what happened with like Carson Wentz the last couple of years, and it's really complex. But one of the main reasons, the second reason, is if a team has someone that they wanted to trade in the NFL and he's a really good player, they have to get an offer that's better than what they think they're going to get if they lose him in free agency. So let's say the guy, they determine that he's probably going to be, or similar player gets a 3rd round compensatory pick when he leaves in free agency. So then when the trade deadline comes up, let's say he's in the last year of his contract, and the best offer they're getting for him is a 4th round pick or something like that, they don't trade him because they'd rather just wait till free agency and pick up a 3rd round pick instead. So I think it might like complicate trades a little bit and prevent that from happening sometimes.
Counterpoint. Like the compensation I had for a good role player, right? Which, would still be an NBA starter, but not somebody super, phenomenal, would be an end of the first round pick. Robert Covington would fall under good role player, and Portland got back Portland traded 2 firsts for him in the middle of the draft. So an end of the first compared to 2 firsts in the middle of the draft. I think it would be a situation where, like, most starters in the league are worth a first round pick. Like, any player within the top 50, or any player in the top 150 is worth a first round pick. So getting a compensation pick at the end of the first round, I think, is worse than most trades for that player. Most good starters, like a Jeremy Grant or whatever. I mean that's potentially one of the examples there. But most starters, most good starters you can get back 2 first round picks for, or a first and a second or whatever. So basically, I think you just have to structure it where the compensation pick is worse than what you could likely get back in a trade for that player. But if for whatever reason that player is like, oh, I only want to go here, I'm only signing an extension here or whatever, and trying to like strong arm you to trade them to a specific destination and get back pennies on the dollar, you could say, oh, well, we'll just let you become a free agent because we get this compensation pick. So there would be a balance to strike there.
Yeah. Take this example. We trade for Jeremy Grant, right? He's in the last year of his contract. Now, let's just ignore that. I think we have a deal in place already when that 6 months becomes available. Unless something disastrous happens between now and then. I think we've already pretty much agreed on an extension. But let's just say we decide we don't want to pay him $25 million a year or whatever it ends up being. And he signs with another team for $25 million a year. Why do we get rewarded for not wanting to pay it?
I mean, what do you mean?
Like, we chose not to pay him. Like, we chose not to have him. I don't think we should get rewarded with a first-round pick just because he went somewhere else.
Well, you likely chose not to pay him at a certain price point, and it's like he got absolutely priced out because a team was willing to pay him more, right? Normally, you're not just going to let a good starter walk for nothing just for the hell of it.
But wouldn't you have already pretty much known what you were going to have to pay him when you traded for him?
No, that's not always the case. Right? Like,
well, it depends on how he does. I mean, if he does, obviously, if he exceeds expectations.
I mean, with Jeremy Grant, it's pretty clear-cut, like, what range of salaries, and other guys is a little bit more arbitrary. But, I mean, it's a situation where normally you're not letting a good starter or a good role player walk for nothing. Mm-hmm. Unless you're trying to clear cap space to bring someone in. So there would need to be something where, like, if you lost, a top-tier free agent, but then you signed another top-tier free agent, it cancels out, right? So there would have to be something in place where it cancels out if you basically let a player walk so that you could bring another player in or whatever. That would kind of be where there would be some complications. But, I mean, I just don't think teams normally let good players like that walk for nothing unless they get completely overpriced by another team, and then it's a situation where, dang, we're still losing this guy.
Yeah. Well, take like PJ Tucker for the Heat, so they should get a mid first round pick.
It wouldn't be mid. He's not a top 75 player.
Okay.
End of the first round pick? Sure, but who'd they sign with their MLE this year?
I believe they used part of it on one of the Caleb Martin. I don't think they used the full MLE.
They already had Caleb Martin though. They didn't.
No, they didn't have his bird rights, so they had to use part of their tax mid-level exception, I believe, to sign him.
Yeah, but he was a player that was on the roster going into the offseason. So they didn't replace PJ Tucker with anyone else, so they lost PJ Tucker. I mean, an end of the first round pick would make sense. for that. But you could limit it so that's only, a certain range of really good players as well. Like, where Miami wouldn't get a pick for PJ Tucker because he's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So that would basically be like, okay, where does each tier, what determines each tier, where are the picks for each tier, how good do you have to be in certain tiers, and like how far down does it go? That would be basically what would have to be determined, and I could absolutely see a system that makes sense without rewarding a compensation pick for PJ Tucker. It's just a situation where it's like if you're Portland, when they lost LaMarcus Aldridge, and he's saying, I want to be there, I want to be there, and then he screws you over. Yeah, Portland should have traded him, hindsight's 2020, but then you lose an all-star caliber player for nothing, and you get screwed.
See, I think they've changed it slightly since then, but we offered LaMarcus an extension the year prior, and it was a lot less than he could have signed with us for the same amount of years if he just waited till the following offseason. So I think the easy solution there would just be to whatever he would make that next offseason be that new contract. And maybe you could, I'd rather like lower the amounts like teams could sign another team's free agent for or something, especially if we're talking about ones over the tax mid-level exception.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem with that is you are restricting player movement even more, whereas this, instead of restricting player movement, you just compensate the teams for losing them. So I think that is the difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, that's the thing, is when you're talking about CBA stuff and potential things that should be introduced, anything that reduces a player's ability to earn is hard to get through. So that's where, compensation picks aren't, it's not a negative for the players at all. It's just a positive for it's basically compensation for the team losing that free agent in terms of a draft pick where they can potentially draft as a replacement or have, an asset back that they can trade. That isn't as good as what they lost, but it's not something where they're losing a really, really good asset and a really, really good player and getting nothing. So,
where did you have Kyrie ranked in your rankings?
22.
And where would that put him in your compensation tier thing?
You get end of the lottery pick, or you could do it where it starts at like 12 instead of 14 or whatever, but it would basically be that range.
So the Nets signed him knowing he was a bit of a head case. This past offseason, he opts out and signs for the tax mid-level exception with the Lakers or whatever he was threatening to do earlier in the offseason. So you think they should get like the 15th pick for that?
Yeah. I mean, it's still one of the best guards in the league that you're losing.
I think that's kind of on them for mismanaging the situation, and they don't deserve to get rewarded for that, in my opinion.
I mean, you're protecting. You're not going to come up with a perfect system where it's like, oh well, you got screwed, so you get a pick, and you mismanaged your assets, so you don't. You know what I mean? But it's like, trade wise, the only reason he doesn't have a lot more trade value than what they would get anyways, because he's Kyrie Irving and there's all these issues, right, like that he brings to the table. But that's the thing. You could make an argument if there's a committee that decides this, like, okay, this is the compensation you get. You could make the argument that, oh, well, he's not a top 25 player or whatever because of all this crap. So you'd only get, a pick of the 20s or whatever, end of the first. That's where if there was a committee for that, it would be interesting, and that might be the best way to work it.
I think that would lead to biases, and then people thinking, "Oh, you're just favoring this team," and then other
absolutely.
But
they already do that with the draft lottery and whatnot. Anyway, it's like somehow baseball pulls it off, right? In regards to arbitration for salary amounts and for arbitration comes in and determines a salary amount that a team and a player should agree to. So, this would be a little bit different, but, yeah, I mean, Kyrie's an outlier, what I mean? Kyrie, I wouldn't not make a rule because, what about Kyrie Irving, the ultimate outlier?
Yeah. I could maybe get behind some sort of after the 30th pick compensatory picks. I don't like the idea of mixing them in throughout the first round, though.
Even if you lose an absolute star.
Yep.
I mean, that you might as well just not have a compensation system then if you only get an end of the first round pick for a star leaving.
Well, I mean, in the NFL, there's never been a first round compensatory pick, so.
Yeah, but the NFL is different where you can find absolute, like, multiple studs being drafted second, third round. Russell Wilson taking the third round. Like, you're talking about a 53-man roster, so one round for a 53-man roster is a lot different than one round for a 15-man roster in a league that's even more star-dominated.
Yeah. It's fun to talk about, but I would vote for not having compensatory picks. I just like the way it is right now.
I mean, the middle ground would be you just have nothing in the lottery. It's just in between the lottery and the playoffs, and teams know that, oh, well, if we make the playoffs, you know, this pick that's at 15 is probably going to be lower. Because that's the thing. The teams know that there's going to be some compensation picks at the end of the lottery or whatever that, you know, the teams that didn't make the playoffs, they don't get screwed at all. And then the teams that made the playoffs is a situation where, like, yeah, we're making the playoffs. Our pick's probably not going to stay at 15 because a star is probably going to sign somewhere else in free agency. So they kind of know that, okay, this pick is probably going to be a little bit lower. I don't view it as them getting screwed.
I also don't like the idea of, like, a rebuilding team purposely loading up on veterans or something and then not signing them just so they could get a bunch more picks in the upcoming draft.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have something in place for that. But most rebuilding teams aren't signing a NBA All-Star. Which is what it would apply to for end of lottery.
I mean, well, how do you determine someone who's, like, deteriorating in skills but is a top 75 player of all time, like Carmelo Anthony and Russell Westbrook and
just
stuff like that?
Just at this point in time, you know, and that's where you'd probably need a committee. If it was contract based, it's like, oh, well, let's sign this guy to a max and then let him walk so that, oh, well, because he was on a max or whatever. Or it would be determined on how much he signs for with the new team, but it's like, I don't know. Like, you could end up, like, there's some complications to this that struggle, but it's like Carmelo is not being viewed as an NBA All-Star in any sort of way. Like, he would not end up with an end of lottery compensation pick.
Yeah.
I don't think he's viewed as a top 150 player right now. He's still inside. Also,
what about, I mean, I guess this was their own doing, but like the Houston Rockets were trying to tank last year, so they didn't play John Wall at all. Mm-hmm. They wanted to play their young players. But if they have him leave in free agency, but let's just say they didn't buy him out and he was on their team still and they sit him out a second straight year, like, he's probably better than a nothing player, even though he hasn't shown it in a couple of years, but I don't think they should get compensated.
Well, you know what you do, and this works for your whole scenario of Kyrie leaving to the Lakers for a taxpayer MLE. You make it so that in order to get compensation for a player, they have to sign for, you know, a certain amount or more.
More than the mid-level exception. Right?
Yeah, like more than the average salary or more than the mid-level exception.
Yeah.
Because it should only be for good players leaving, and good players are going to make more than the average salary, so you make that be a prerequisite as part of it. So, like, you'd get no compensation for John Wall because he signed for, like, $5 million, and then, you know, in that Kyrie situation, you get no compensation for Kyrie. Like, that's the thing is, for any situation, that's why the CBA is so complicated. That's why I wanted to have this stream. Okay, so you guys could actually hear the thought process behind different CBA ideas and understand why the CBA is so freaking complicated is because there's all these different scenarios where you have to come up with certain rules so that, you know, whatever you introduce to the CBA isn't exploited by teams or there's not loopholes or that sort of thing. Because I've been asked multiple times and people in stream chat in the past have said it, Eric, like, Why is the CBA so complicated? This is why. And that's the thing. If you have a compensation system, you're going to have people saying, what about this scenario? Just like Eric's been doing. What about this scenario? What about that scenario? This doesn't make sense in this scenario. And you have to try and eliminate those scenarios or come up with rules that make it make sense.
Yeah. This kind of a side tangent, but in one of my fantasy football leagues, it's a keeper league.
Yeah.
And you can draft a player, and then you get that player for cheap the second year of his career, and then after 2 years you can sign him up to 3 years, and there's, depending on if you sign him to 1, 2, or 3 years, it's a certain amount more than what he goes for under your cap or whatever you have.
Yeah.
And so we had a situation last year. This is the first time this has ever come up, but Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, and he's in the 5th year, so it's the final year of someone being able to have him as a this guy was going to have to drop him and couldn't keep him as one of his keepers, right? And so he drops him, and we don't have waivers in that league. So you have 9 moves the entire season, and you can pick up, like, even while games are going on, you can pick up players.
Yeah.
So he gets dropped. Someone immediately picks him up. And then so he has Christian McCaffrey as his keeper for whatever a free agent running back amount towards your cap is. And it was just came down to whoever saw him drop it first, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, we had to talk about it for like a half an hour, how we would deal with this kind of situation in the future. And like every some solution someone would come up with had some sort of flaw in it and wasn't fair to something else that we did. And so, like, that kind of reminded me of the CBA argument, is like, that's the problem. There's all these wrinkles that, yes, they might only come up once every 10 years or may never come up, but you have to account for what happens if they do.
Yeah. Well, what'd you guys decide?
So we decided that if a player was on the last year of their deal with you and you drop them, that player was ineligible to be picked up by another player for the rest of the season if he was injured. Obviously, if he was still playing, he could still play. So yeah.
I mean, do you guys not just think about instituting a rule if it was the last year that he could be kept, and then if he got picked up, then he couldn't be kept?
What do you mean?
Like, Christian McCaffrey's 5th year, the last year he can be kept, gets dropped, and then the team that picked him up could then keep him the following year. You guys didn't think about instituting a rule where if it was the final year of a keeper, like, they could be kept last year, that would apply to the new team if they got dropped and then picked up again? Or
Well, yeah, we talked about that. I mean, that's ultimately kind of what we decided on. But yeah, it just made, because, like, why would you pick him up if you couldn't keep him if he was hurt for the year, right? So that was kind of the final decision. So, but yeah, it was like, we argued about it for like a half an hour. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's just a crazy situation. I mean,
it's definitely fun
normally
though, like,
ESPN, like ESPN has certain players that you can't drop, and then if they get injured, they change it. So yeah, I mean, in fantasy football, even there's like weird bylaws and stuff with ESPN where you can't drop certain players because they're too good. Like, it makes no sense to drop them unless you're screwing over a league basically, or yourself. So
because the argument was, like, let's say my friend and I were both had players that were in the last year of their contract, and we told each other we were about to drop this player and told the other person to pick him up, and then we could have him for next year. So, like, we don't want stuff like that to happen, like collusion and things like that, because that could very easily happen. Not that I think anyone would do that, but you got to prevent against those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, but if, like, you look at the CBA and all the rules, there's all sorts of crazy stipulations and bylaws to eliminate that stuff that, if we were thinking of it as an idea, like, we wouldn't even be able to explain on stream just off the top of our heads, like poison pills and that sort of thing, right? Like, so, that's the thing. A compensation system, I think you could, if you spend a ton of time on it, you could come up with a system that would work in the future. I wouldn't hate to see it at all, because I mean, most of the time, a free agent that leaves is screwing over a small market and going to a big market, right? And the big market can be ran terribly, and then, oh, well, LeBron wants to come here. Awesome. We got LeBron. Oh, now LeBron's here. Now we can trade for AD because he wants to be here. And then they trade for AD and then they win a championship where Cleveland's just like, well, LeBron left us for nothing again. Like, cool. I mean, props to Cleveland for rebuilding well. You know, it's not a death. You know, it's not the death of a franchise. You're still going to have high picks. It's just, yeah, you know, it's normally Cleveland or a city like Cleveland, you know, Portland getting screwed over for a city like LA or Brooklyn or whoever.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I believe the Lakers haven't made the playoffs 7 out of the last 9 years. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yep. Anyway, I'm reading chat right now. So what if New York said, based on your stats, we think 100 million over 4 years, not 30? So he signs with another team. In this case, there should be compensation, right? I don't really understand the question.
He's talking about R.J. Barrett's extension, like if they didn't want to pay him 120 million and only offered him 100 million, and then he signed with someone else. It's a little different with rookies because they're or people on their rookie deals because they can match any contract. So I don't think you should be compensated if you had the right to match a contract.
That's a whole nother, because that's a restricted free agent situation, which is different, and who knows how you would make it you know, like you'd probably have a different set of rules for restricted free agents. So, that is.
I think I would rather have your one-time franchise tag over
compensation.
Over compensation, yeah.
No.
Because then the Blazers could have used that on Aldridge or whatever.
Yeah, or they could have just gotten a lottery pick for Aldridge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. You could use the franchise tag, but then it's like, what about our salary, though? Were we close to the hard cap at the time? You know, because that's the thing. You have to make it where, like, if a player gets screwed out free agency, they have to make at least, like, the Supermax, right? Like, that should be compensation for them losing their free agencies. They get paid as much as they could have made, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
But there should also be a hard cap instituted, because that's the thing. You don't want, you know... You don't want teams to just use it for the hell of it.
But so at the same time, I mean, you were talking about how it's BS that Durant demands a trade before his contract even goes into effect. But LeBron played out his full 4-year contract with the Cavs. It's not like he left early and left them empty-handed. I mean, the Cavs.
What is your question?
Should have prepared, don't you think, for knowing that he could have left after his contract was over?
I mean, but how do you even prepare for that? Like,
I don't.
Did you trade him?
No, not trade him, but like,
So...
I mean, I think they kind of knew there was a chance he would leave for the Lakers, so that was the rumor at the time. I don't know.
So they should have prepared. I don't know what you mean.
I mean, like, I don't know how they prepare for it, but I don't think they should necessarily be rewarded because a player came for them, went to 4 finals, and then
it's not even rewarded. To me, it's compensated for losing them. I don't think we get a reward by losing LeBron. I don't look at it like that.
I mean, they had already had like 3 out of the last 5 years first-round picks before he came there. Like, how much help do they need?
Yeah, but they're still losing LeBron. So, and a lottery pick is not even close to the value of LeBron. Or even if it's a mid-lottery pick, it's still not close to the value of LeBron. So it's not even a reward to me. It's like, oh, you get some slight compensation for losing at the time. You're still the best player in the world.
What would have happened with that the year he left for Miami? Because it ended up being a sign and trade, and they wouldn't have been able to sign him for that.
That's where if you had a compensation committee or whatever, they could take into account what you got back in a sign and trade when awarding pick compensation. Because sign and trades obviously is a thing, since you're getting compensation back by the player basically going to a new team through free agency through a sign and trade. So that's the other situation where, like, if it's a sign and trade, do you get any compensation back? Like, how does that work, you know? So that's the thing where if you had a committee, Obviously, with the committee though, is they could play favoritism, and people will say favoritism, so that's the problem. That's why I'm not even saying I'm for it, but there would be some things that need to be ironed out.
So, I think it's 2 years from now when the Lakers organization has run the franchise into the ground. AD and LeBron are still good players, but it's to the point where they're mad and want to leave LA. So they get compensated if those two players leave in free agency in 2024.
Well, part of the thing I had is you'd only get one compensation pick in each tier. You couldn't have two.
I mean, LeBron will be like 39.
Yeah, but it's like, oh, we don't have any of our future picks for years because we got LeBron and AD and tried to surround them with the best teams possible, and then both of them leave and we get a late lottery pick. Like, they're still screwed. They don't have their picks. They're unprotected. Owed to teams in the future. A 14th, 15th pick isn't going to change anything in regards to them screwing themselves over long term.
Yeah.
And the only way it could even lessen the blow is if they used it right anyway. You could end up with the next freaking Denzel Valentine or Torian Prince. Like,
I thought you were going to say Torrey Jones.
Or the next Torrey Jones. Yeah, I mean, well, that would be... I don't want to be on the Lakers, though, so I'd hold out and demand a trade. But, yeah, so... You'd have to make the compensation make sense where they would be picking. And there would be all these different scenarios that you'd have to try and plan for. But fun to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other ideas or CBA things or anything?
No, I mean, we pretty much talked about everything I was thinking of as well, so...
All right, so chat, do you have anything else? If you have any different rules you'd like to see in the next CBA, if you have any CBA questions, anything, we'll answer them. It's been interesting to see CBA talk go down in chat. I've enjoyed it. Rather than compensating players, or Marcus Lake says, rather than compensating teams when they lose players, maybe it'd be better to make sure all teams eat crow equally, like denying the CP3 to LA trade and such. I don't really I don't understand what you mean.
Maybe he's saying like LeBron can't leave Cleveland to go to LA or something.
Yeah, no, like you couldn't do that, and there would be no chance players, because that's your A, restricting player movement, B, you're dictating where players can and can't go, C, the only reason why the only reason CP3 to the Lakers was vetoed was because the NBA at the time owned the New Orleans Hornets. They owned the team. The owner had stepped away. The NBA itself, like David Stern, was basically the acting owner of the New Orleans Hornets. So as the owner, essentially, of the New Orleans Hornets, they nixed the trade. Just like any owner would with any team where a GM says, hey, what about this trade? That's the thing that people seem to forget with the CP3 to the Lakers situation. Oh, in-season tourney, Eric?
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts, because I talked about on the Believe podcast with Steven, and I think me and him were a little bit more positive than you would be. So let's finish off this stream talking, because this is like a CBA thing, kind of. So in-season tournament.
I thought of my last CBA thing. My rule would be to ban in-season tournaments from ever happening and ever being discussed again. End of story. No more discussion about it. No chance it ever happens. That would be my rule. I'd put in place. I'd probably put it in place over any other rule. I think it's so dumb.
Do you think it's dumb because the problems that would arise because of it, or do you think it's dumb because it wouldn't mean anything? Like,
all of the above.
Where does your hatred come in?
Well, one is I don't like that the schedule will get messed up. Part of my problem is
part of it would get messed up, though.
Well, like the way they're talking about it, it's like 8 teams qualify for it, and they play against it's basically the 8 best teams have to play each other, while the other 22 teams get a softer schedule or whatever and play the worst. And so, like, I don't think that's fair. Like, you get punished for making the tournament and having to play other teams that obviously did well enough to qualify it as well. So I don't like that. I don't like the idea of, I mean, who cares if you win the midseason tournament? Like, no one's going to care. Even if you put some sort of like draft compensation, players don't give a crap about whether your team gets a higher draft pick or not, because that might mean a replacement for them. You know, like,
you'd have to make it worth it for the players somehow with some sort of prize, and you have to make it matter. Like, that's the thing, is people are like, oh, well, whoever wins it doesn't matter. Well, it's like, what does one regular season game matter already? The regular season is already kind of mundane, right? So it's like, you know, that's the thing, is you'd have to make it matter for the players and the organization to win, and you'd have to make it mean something. If it meant something, ignoring all the other potential issues from it, because there would be multiple, one of them you just said with the schedule, but ignoring all other issues, I wouldn't hate it if there wasn't other issues, because it would make the already mundane 6-month-long 82-game regular season, it would make it a little bit more intriguing and maybe make, you know, some of those games mean a little bit more.
Why?
Well, that goes back to, you'd have to make it worth it somehow. I don't know how.
Well, see,
I don't know how.
I think you'd have to pay, like, there would have to be some sort of monetary thing. Yeah. But this goes back to the first thing we talked about, and that's, I'd rather, if they're going to pay players, I'd rather them invest that money into the G League and making that successful, and propping that up to the point where maybe you have like a futures tournament or something, and that's like, you have like your G League championship as the in-season tournament, and maybe you allow some of your younger players into your roster to play in it or something like that. That might be more fun to me than having like an actual. I
just feel like that's Summer League. That's what Summer League would become, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but like, why have Summer League in the middle of the season? It just,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, though, is like, oh, could this format help the league generate more revenue so they could reward players with a monetary prize without spending any extra money because they're generating more revenue through it? You know what I mean? But, like, that's the thing, is fans would have to care about it, too, you know? So it'd have to get more viewership and, you know, be able to charge fans more for entering arenas. Like, it'd have to mean something to fans and to players and to organizations. I can't think of a way they can make that happen. But, well, you know, if they can, then all right, well, address that, and then there's still a bunch of other issues.
Here's the thing. The NBA is trying very hard, and I think they successfully did it, of trying to find a way to incorporate the one-and-done style of the NCAA tournament into the NBA. And they did it with the play-in games. Those have been, I think, very successful. Now, I was really pissed off at the results of one of the play-in games in particular last year, for obvious reasons as a Blazer fan. But it's been fun watching a winner-go-home type scenario for 2 teams and for 4 games total over the both conferences and stuff like that. So I like the play-in tournament, and that actually has a playoff spot on the line. So maybe you make the mid-season tournament, like Loney says in chat, maybe have it be worth an automatic playoff spot. But then how do you determine what seed you are if you're that? And I don't know.
Well, I had an idea where how far you advance in it is the first playoff tiebreaker for seeding. So, like, if you win the, you win the tournament, that's you own every tiebreaker versus every team in the Western Conference in terms of the playoff race. If you make it to the, championship game, but then you lose to another Western Conference team, then you'd own the tiebreaker over every team other than the Western Conference team you lost to. And if you made it to, the final 8, then you'd own the tiebreaker over any teams that didn't make it to the final 8 or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would you maybe incentivize organizations without being too drastic, but that's the thing. It's like it has to be meaningful enough, but you can't make it too meaningful where it breaks something else. That's the problem.
Maybe if you're like in the top 10 at the end, if you win it and you're in the top 10 at the end of the season, you don't have to play in the play-in game. You automatically get the 6th seed or something, and then the 6th seed gets bumped to the 7th seed, or I don't know.
Yeah. See, I'd be down with that too, but it'd be a situation where it's like the team that wins it is probably already a top team in the league that doesn't care. Like, we don't need to be guaranteed a top 6 seed. We are currently like 30-10, you know. Yeah. So that's the problem.
I mean, okay, yay, Blazers won the championship for the mid-season tournament. Like, it's cool. Like, I would rather them win it than...
We get hyped over Summer League championships here.
No, I know, but, like, I mean, it's not like they get anything for winning that. It was just cool that we made the championship game and won it. But, like, I mean, it's not like we're throwing a parade or anything as much as we joked about doing so. But that, I don't know, like, Dame didn't even know we won like, he had to be told that we won the championship. Like, how much do these guys really care about that kind of stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Zach says the team that wins should get an extra second round pick. That doesn't motivate the players, though. I think you motivate the players with money. You motivate the organization maybe with an extra pick. And then, I mean, fans aren't going to care about an extra second round pick, so it's like, how do you get fans to buy into it more than it's just like, oh, it'd be cool if we won this? I don't know.
I think it works in other leagues because, like soccer, there's so many different leagues and so many different levels, and it's cool to see, like, the Timbers play the, like the Bolivian national team or something in, like, the CONCACAF Cup or whatever it's called. It's like there's different things, but like a lot of those times, like, the Timbers wouldn't play their best players in a meaningless game, you know. So I think they're trying to like get that excitement going. I just don't see any way. It's not like I'm not willing to give it a chance or anything. I just don't see how anyone would ever care about it.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, I forget exactly what I said in the podcast earlier, but basically it's like, if they can somehow figure out a way to make it worth it, to not make it so important that it breaks something else, so that they can make it fair in terms of the scheduling, so that, like, they can basically solve every issue and then make it meaningful, I'm okay with it. I just don't see how they feasibly do that. Mm-hmm. But I'd hope that, since they're apparently taking this so seriously, that they have people spending a lot more time than I have thinking up solutions for certain things. But I do not trust them. I don't trust them to not have 2 or 3 issues with it. Like, if they institute this for next season, I feel like there's going to be 2 or 3 issues with it where it's like, what the hell were you doing? That's what I expect. And I think that's probably what you expect too, huh?
Mm-hmm. So Zach has been very much as a proponent of giving it a chance, and, like, why does it not have to mean anything? But so even if you thought it could mean something eventually, it's just like a handful of qualifying games and then a one-and-done tournament between 8 teams in the format they're presenting it in. It's like, I don't see how that could ever be close to being an NBA champion or anything like that, where you have a full playoffs and a full regular season. Like, there's no way it would ever mean anything other than, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, also, here's something that I didn't say that I want to say. If it was taking place this year in November, were the games that determined who made the final 8, Portland has, like, by far the hardest schedule in November out of probably any team in the league.
Yeah.
Like, how would you make it so that the qualifying games are even?
Mm-hmm.
But then it'd also be a situation where it's like, oh, well, we win this last game, then we have to play 3 games against difficult teams. And, I mean, honestly, though, I don't think that's as much of a problem, because if you lose in the first round, then you could play, you know, a team that maybe wasn't in the final 8. I don't know how you'd format that, but... You know, you could make it so, like, oh, the only teams that have to play 3 hard teams as part of the 8-team bracket are the teams that are already winning.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the scheduling. It's just like, how would you schedule around it and make it make sense schedule-wise? That's where I struggle. And so it's like a situation where it's like, oh, because that's the problem. If it's like, oh, if we win this final game, we make the 8-team tournament, but then we'd have to play 3 hard games, whereas if we lose this game, then we don't make the 8-team tournament and we play 3 easy games, and they count towards our regular season record. If the tournament doesn't matter that much, then it could be a situation where it's like, I'm cool with losing this game so that we miss it, so that we can win the next 3, because I think our record will be better if we actually lose this game and don't make the final 8-team tournament. Like, there's so many different potential issues with it. Like, that's why it has to mean something.
I agree with Chris in chat. He says the mid-season tournament is just a gimmick. And to me, that's why I can never fully buy into it, because it will always feel like it was just a ploy or a gimmick to make money. And yes, as a business, you should try to make money, but I don't think it changes anything about the level of competition or the meaningfulness of the regular season or anything like that. I just think it's just them trying to force something to happen that they think would be good for the league that they're really not considering the reasons why it wouldn't be.
I can't call it a gimmick because it's correlated between the league making more money and making a section of the regular season matter more to fans. There's a correlation there. They're not going to make more money if, like, the mid-season tournament doesn't matter more to fans. And it's not going to matter more to fans if they don't do it right.
You know how the bubble, it's like, oh, Dame was the MVP of the bubble. He's got a Mickey Mouse MVP trophy, you know, like, that's all it's going to be is those stupid ass.
That's if you're on Twitter.
Jokes. Yeah, but that's on social media. That's all it's going to be, and it's going to be so freaking annoying because the bubble had some incredibly good basketball being played in it, and it's just I don't know. It's just.
I mean, that's just. I'm not seeing many of those. I don't know if it's because I'm paying less attention to Twitter or if kids are finally reaching the age where, like, oh, well, Mickey isn't funny anymore. Mickey Mouse, blah, blah, blah. Right? Like, I'll occasionally jokingly say that in jest. You know what I mean? I think I might have jokingly said that earlier in this stream just to kind of mock it. But I don't care about... I don't know. Screw the kids on Twitter that make bad jokes, man. I don't care. Don't clip that or take it out of context. Anyway. Yeah, Mickey Mouse MVP, Mickey Mouse ring.
La Mickey. Max Anderson says, what about an NBA lottery tournament where the winner gets the first overall pick and loser gets second pick? That would have to be at the end of the season, but in my opinion, as cool as that would be in theory, why you'd have players like Damian Lillard who wanted the number 1 pick, right? They might try hard. But for the most part, like, Jeremy Grant this year isn't going to want us to get the first pick in a draft with 3 power forwards that are potential superstars and take his position, and we maybe not offer him an extension because we got the number 1 pick and took, like, Banchero or whatever. And so, like, most players aren't going to want or care that their team is getting a potential replacement for them to play hard enough to win those games, unless they're so significantly compensated that it didn't matter. But I don't see why they did.
Yeah, and it's like, you also wouldn't want a team like, oh, well, we could get the 8th seed and get swept by the Golden State Warriors, or we could end up in this lottery tournament, which we would be the favorite to win, and we could get the number 1 overall pick. You'd have organizations purposely missing the playoffs, I think, or wanting to miss the playoffs, where players would want to make the playoffs, and then if they missed the playoffs, wouldn't want to play for the number 1 overall pick for a guy to probably replace them. And then you throw in the fact that these guys just played an 82-game season, so you're talking about you'd probably have a player get seriously injured, and maybe miss the entirety of next season just for a draft lottery tournament. I've never been on board with that idea. It just doesn't work.
Can you imagine us rooting for the Karis LeVert jumper to go in so we could play in instead of making the 8th seed and losing to the Lakers in the first round? We were rooting for us to not make.
I would have.
Yeah.
I would have. I absolutely would have. Come on,
Chris. You should have taken it to the rack.
Oh, we're going to the playoffs, man. I wanted the number 1 overall pick because that's what you're.
Because we would have had a great
shot
at it that year. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dame's. Who was the first overall pick that next offseason? What was that? 2020.
Yeah.
I'll just look up the 2020 NBA draft. And that's the thing. If we didn't win it, if we you won a couple games and you got a higher pick because of it, we could get Anthony Edwards. That draft wasn't that great. But if you look at the year before, if we missed the playoffs, we could get Zion Williamson. Or we could get Karl Anthony Towns, or we could get Luka Doncic. We could get, you know what I mean?
Or we could draft Bagley instead of Luka.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're the Kings, then you don't have to worry about missing the playoffs, so you play in the lottery tournament anyway, and then you can draft the next Marvin Bagley again. Keegan Murray. I hope he doesn't go. I'm just kidding. What'd you think of me having a Keegan Murray as a low top 100 player his rookie year? Because his projection for next year. I think he'll be a top 100 player next year.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't really have any feelings either way about it.
I wondered if people are going to be surprised if they watched that series. If you didn't watch that series, you missed out, I guess, or something. But I think he's ready. But I think okay. Game 1, I feel like Grant's a good matchup for Keegan Murray to put up against Keegan Murray. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Even though he's not his best as a on-ball defender, I think, he's
better on ball when he doesn't have to deal with being screened. Mm-hmm. And Keegan Murray, I mean, maybe they'll have him running pick and rolls, but that's kind of the one thing where it's I haven't really been impressed with. I haven't seen him run much pick and roll or do a whole lot in that regard. So that's why I feel like Grant would be a good defender on him.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll preview game 1 as we get closer to the season. I just thought about that recently. So anyway, anything else you want to say for the stream?
Zach says, what if the winner gets automatic home court advantage in any playoff series?
See, I thought about that, and it just that feels like it's too much. But the fans would care, and the players would care, and the organization would care. It's just is that too much, though?
I agree with Trevin. That's what I was going to say, is that makes the other 70-plus games less meaningful than your 8 games between the qualifying games and your 3 games in the tourney. A lot less meaningful. I'd just rather have...
I don't think that's the case for every team, because you're just talking about one team winning it out of 30.
Mm-hmm.
So it's if it's a team in the Eastern Conference, it doesn't change anything for the West.
But if you win 42 games and sneak into the playoffs as the 8th seed versus a team that won 65 games and was the 1 seed, you get home court advantage. All because you maybe had an easier schedule in November or something.
I mean, that 1 seed should still hypothetically win that series.
Well, yeah, I know.
So and then they have home court advantage the rest of the playoffs, and then potentially in the finals if they won enough games. And that's only in the scenario where a top team doesn't win. You know what I mean? That does feel like a little bit much, but that could honestly be, if they do it, that might be the best way to make it matter. But yeah, it's you get home court advantage in the play-in as a 10 seed. You know what I mean?
Do you get home court as the 10 seed in the play-in too?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, like I don't know, man. Taylor Packer says you're forgetting the life advice section at the end of your live streams, though. Okay, yes. For the rest of the off season, the final 5 minutes, we're giving life advice. I assume Taylor's gonna have a good question for us, Eric.
Starting now. It's
11:27. We're cutting it off at 11:32. Ask us for life advice. I told him. Maybe we'll start making a segment at the end of every stream. But I'll do it for him. Because last time was funny. Truly Spencer says, was it Moda for WWE tonight? Water prices must be changed. Yeah, my life advice is don't buy anything at Moda. Because it's ridiculous.
Until people refuse to buy it. As
Drink
like a
out of the toilet if you're thirsty at that point. I mean, I'm not buying $6 bottle of water that's like a mini-sized bottle of water. Zach says, have you guys ever had a stalker, and how did you deal with it? No, I've never had a stalker, man.
No comment. Why is that?
Taylor...
Do you have a stalker?
What? Yeah. Is something you need to tell us about, Zach? Yeah, Eric says call the police. Yeah. But the problem is police aren't going to do anything. They don't really do anything about stalkers. Yeah. But that's more of a problem that females deal with instead of males. So, yeah, I couldn't imagine. Because, like, I'm all about peace of mind. Dealing with a stalker would be brutal, man. Like, just seems like it would absolutely rob you of your peace of mind. Taylor says, I only have one TV in my apartment. How do I convince my girl that watching football is more important than stupid reruns of The Office?
Sounds to me like someone named Taylor needs to either buy another TV or a tablet,
buy another girlfriend,
or a laptop or something where she could watch reruns of The Office on, or you could watch TV on and watch football on. So that's your fault for not having more than one screen if you have more than one person in your house.
Yeah, or you could be a good wingman and see if she has a friend, right? And then your boy Tori will come over there with his TV and his PS4, and it can be a double date, and we can put Red Zone up on my PS4, and then we can have a second TV. That seems like a good solution to me.
Buy another girlfriend. So, okay. Is a girlfriend cheaper than a TV nowadays? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean...
I'm out of the game for a long time. So.
It's like all about... I don't know, man. It's... kind of have two different roads now, where it's like... A lot of girls... I know back in the day it was like, the guy always pays. Now it's like you either have a girl that's like completely comfortable with splitting it, or it's like the girl wants you to buy her everything. It's one or the other.
So, back up a second. Are you saying that you would be on a double date but both of you are dating Taylor Packer's girlfriend?
No, I said get Taylor Packer's girlfriend to invite a friend over.
A friend. Okay.
And then we can double date, and I can bring my PS4 and my TV.
So she's going to invite someone that wants to watch Office reruns with her while you guys watch football?
Yeah, I mean, everybody loves Office reruns. So, I mean, that sounds like a win-win for both me and you and both of them. That sounds like a quadruple win to me. He says, can we forget the girls and call it a real date, though, Tori?
Good night, Mom.
Yeah, man, sure. If you buy me dinner first or breakfast, since it's Sunday morning, all right. You gotta pay up for me. Anyway, now you've donated it. It works. It's good enough. Zach says, no way you're getting a double date when you still only got a PS. I think you meant PS4.
Yeah. God, you ruined the joke, Zach. Jeez, man.
Yeah, come on, Zach. You got to pull off the execution a little better than that. Yeah, I call it my Boeing PS4 because it sounds like an airplane when I started out, man. I'm tired of it. It randomly turns off occasionally.
That's a good question by Jackson.
What Jackson asked?
If they're watching Office reruns and you're watching football, why do you need them there?
Come on, Jackson. You said that was a good question, Eric?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good question. I'm not answering that.
Okay.
He says life advice should be 10 minutes. This is just how streams were the first season. We did things where we kind of just chilled and didn't like the whole second half of post game streams weren't really about basketball. It was fun, man. So shout out to Taylor. Taylor, I'm sorry to hear that, man. And Jackson, I don't know what you're talking about. A double date would imply that, yes, there is another guy there, and that is Taylor. Yes. Zach says backward streams with 30% basketball and 70% whatever. Yeah. Those were the days, man. That's some of the most fun I had streaming.
Yeah.
So, got to remember our roots before we start the regular season, because during the regular season, it's all going to be like, oh, look, I'm a YouTuber, and I can make my streams look like TV with the graphics. Look at me, guys, and I'm just super freaking try hard. So, yeah, I'm down. Last 5 minutes, 10 minutes of streams just to talk about whatever. Taylor says, well, thanks, guys. This has really helped me out. The question I have for you is, has it helped me out, though? Hopefully. Zach, that's Cal Raleigh. He's a Mariners catcher. Yes. Trevin says, and then that one guy on Reddit complains about you talking about graphics too much. Yeah, I saw that. Did you ever see that, Eric?
Talking about graphics?
Yeah, this dude on Reddit was like, this dude just brags about his graphics too much and talks about graphics too or something like that. And it's like, sorry for taking pride in my work, man.
I saw the ones where you talk about your college career too much. But...
Yeah. I haven't talked, dude. How many times did I talk about college basketball this offseason, Eric? Like twice?
I don't know. I think I brought it up both times.
I know. You're trying to make me look bad. You're trying to be Reddit's favorite. Smart. I want to do like Reddit videos maybe once a month. YouTubers have done that where it's like they ask Reddit a question and go over the responses. That could be entertaining. And maybe they'll finally officially like me more than they hate me over there. But could be a good video. Zach, I will graciously give you a pass on that because
that was funny.
Yeah.
Carson says, if I was here for early Blazers Uprise, it would have really shaped me as a human with all the life advice talks.
Yeah, I don't think it would have shaped you for the better, though, Carson.
You turned out okay somehow.
That's why you're the, like, one married man here in chat. Zach said bye because he thought I was going to ban him. Carson says, in all seriousness, I always appreciate you guys' candidness and willingness to interact. Always, man. You guys make this entertaining. You guys make the streams what they are. You know, we try to make it like a podcast, and, you know, like, we've tried making it more professional, all that, but still the thing that makes it unique is the community and the live chat.
And that's another thing we get railed on about is, oh, why are you focusing on chat so much? Just talk about the Blazers. Like,
it's like we already do.
Like,
man.
Yeah. Well, like when there's trolls and stuff, like you're feeding the trolls. Like, well,
but then if we
that's
don't
part of the
talk
fun.
to them,
yeah, like some people like that. So I don't know. It's hard to find a balance, but
yeah. I mean, but the thing is, if we don't interact with chat, then people are like, oh, well, you guys became big time, and now you don't interact with chat anymore, and then it's like other people have a problem when we don't interact with chat. There's nothing we can do that isn't going to bother a portion of people, is what I've realized. So, is what it is. All right, it's time to end the stream, Jackson. So, it looks like I advertised this on last stream. It looks like we found potentially a second person for post-game show graphics, but Chris only wants to do part-time, and there still might be games where we need someone. So if you also potentially want to help out with post-game graphics next season, if you know Photoshop a little bit, it's nothing too fancy, then let me know. Email me, blazersuprise@gmail.com, or DM me on Twitter or something like that, and we can, you know, maybe potentially bring you on for post-game show graphics next year. And then content dropped earlier today, Believe podcast. The video is right here on this channel. And then in the description of that is a link to the audio. And then dropped a top 100 players video earlier today. I'm going to try and drop the next one probably in the middle of the night in the next, 3-4 hours, maybe early morning. But then tomorrow we'll have 1 to 10 and we'll have Eric's CBA video. What are you covering in the CBA video?
The hard cap.
Yeah, so I'm going to put some graphics on that too. Eric's covering the hard cap, and that'll be like a little buffer in between the top 100 series and the player previews, which start on Thursday. I'm just trying to find the best graphics package for that since I'm going try hard with the animations now. Now it's not going to be graphics, it's going to be animations, Eric. All right, maybe that will please Reddit. Anyway, appreciate all the love, Taylor, Carson. Appreciate all you guys supporting the channel and being here and making this chat so great. Anything else that you want to say, Mr. Brandt?
Thank you to everyone for watching. And if you're watching this later, feel free to comment down below with your ideas for CBA questions or ideas that you have that you'd like to see change in the next CBA. Maybe we talk about them on a future episode.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So with that being said, that's our wrap for this episode of Blazers Uprise Live. We'll be live once again on Thursday as always. We'll be during preseason, it'll be just post-game shows probably. We'll sort out a schedule that we'll have at the end of September, which is only a couple weeks away. So and then during the regular season, we're switching back to 3:30 p.m. So we're almost done with the 9:30 p.m. Blazers Uprise Lives. Can't wait to get into picks against the spread and all that only a month from now. So hopefully you guys are as excited for the season as we are. We'll have you covered as always. Until next time, peace out. Go Blazers.